Once again, thank you for joining us for our data release webinar on accessing and using data from the Head Start Family and Child Experiences Survey 2019, also known as FACES 2019. My name is Brinda Mahishi, and I am a data project manager for the Child and Family Data Archive. We're joined today by our colleagues from Mathematica, Ashley Kopet-Klein, who's the deputy.
Hi there.
Ashley is the deputy project director, and we have Elizabeth Malone.
Hello, welcome everyone.
Elizabeth is the project director for FACES 2019. Ashley and Elizabeth will lead the presentation today, but before I turn it over to them, I will briefly introduce you to the Child and Family Data Archive and let you know about the structure of this webinar. This webinar is hosted by the Child and Family Data Archive, also known as CFData, which is where you go to access the FACES 2019 data. CFData is supported by a contract from OPRE and housed at ICPSR within the University of Michigan. It is the place to discover, access, and analyze data on young children, their families and communities, and the programs that serve them. Users are able to access over 300 data sets with the ability to analyze select data sets online. You can also search and compare variables and peruse data-related publications. And of course, user support is available to assist users in finding and obtaining data. I will go into more detail about the archive later in the webinar. For today's webinar, Ashley and Elizabeth will provide you with an overview of FACES 2019, as well as information on the data file structure and conventions, weights and variance estimation, and data user resources. Following these sections, I will give an overview of the Child and Family Data Archive and the resources we have to support researchers in finding and analyzing data. Importantly, I will share how users can request access to the FACES 2019 data through the CFData website. And then Ashley will talk about current study plans. Finally, we'll close this webinar with a brief question and answer session. I am now going to pass the presentation over to the Mathematica team so they can share information on the FACES 2019 data.
Great, thank you so much, Brenda. So I really appreciate the opportunity to share information today and want to acknowledge our study partners at the Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation within the Administration for Children and Families of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Specifically, I'd like to acknowledge our FACES project officers, Nina Phillipson and Alicia Blandon, with Alicia on the webinar today. Most importantly, I want to recognize the 165 Head Start programs who participated in FACES 2019. In particular, they saw the value of continuing to participate in the study as the COVID-19 pandemic started to devastate the country. For over 50 years, Head Start has provided child development and family support services. Since it started in 1965, Head Start has served nearly 30 million children and families who are economically disadvantaged. It supports children and families through educational, nutritional, social, emotional, and family support services, and cultural and language experiences. Head Start serves a diverse population. According to the FACES 2019 data, in fall 2019, a little over 40% of Head Start children lived at or below the federal poverty threshold, with most parents working full or part-time. The children in Head Start were racially and ethnically diverse, with 35% Hispanic Latino, 33% Black, and 20% white children. They also had diverse linguistic backgrounds, with 22% of children primarily spoken to in a language other than English at home. FACES 2019 is the 7th in a series of nationally representative studies of Head Start, with earlier studies conducted since 1997. It began as a study of Head Start performance and describes the population Head Start serves, staff qualifications, credentials, and opinions, Head Start classroom practices and qualities, and outcomes of children and families. It helps policymakers address current policy questions and to support program and practitioners working with Head Start families. FACES includes a nationally representative sample of Head Start programs in regions 1 through 10 and the children and families they serve. The sample does not include American Indian and Alaska Native, or AIAN, programs in Region 11, or migrant and seasonal Head Start programs in Region 12. FACES 2019 also does not include programs in Puerto Rico and other U.S. territories, programs not directly providing services to 3, 4, and 5-year-olds, and programs under transitional management or soon to be defunded. Data files are available at the Child and Family Data Archive for separate studies that include Region 11. There's the American Indian and Alaska Native Head Start and Family Experiences Survey, or AIN FACES. For Region 12, there's the Migrant and Seasonal Head Start Study. And for Early Head Start, there's the Early Head Start Family and Child Experiences Survey, or BABY FACES. The focus of today's webinar is the FACES 2019 data that was collected in fall 2019 and spring 2020. FACES 2019 includes 2 studies that capture a core set of data to be repeated over time. There's the Classroom plus Child Outcome Study and the Classroom Study. The Classroom plus Child Outcome Study provides information about the children and families who participated in Head Start, whereas the Classroom Study provides information on Head Start programs, classroom, and staff, including program and center directors and teachers. The Classroom plus Child Outcome Study was conducted in fall and spring of the 2019 through 2020 Head Start year. The Classroom Study was conducted in spring 2020 and will be conducted again in spring 2022. FACES 2019 also included a spring 2020 topical module on program and center responses to the COVID-19 pandemic. Spring 2020 data collection was scheduled to begin in mid-March at around the same time that COVID-19 was declared a pandemic. In response, most Head Start programs closed their physical buildings and changed their operations to continue to meet the needs of participating families. The topical module featured an additional 10 minutes of program and center director survey items. It collected information about how programs adjusted their services and communication with families and staff, and about the supports that were provided during the pandemic. So the figure on the screen shows the flow of the sample selection for the 2 studies and the expected sample sizes at each level of sampling. 180 programs were selected to participate in FACES 2019, including 60 programs with child-level data collection and 120 programs with no child-level data. They were selected from the final 2017 to 2018 Head Start Program Information Report database. A multi-stage sample design was used with 4 stages: Head Start programs, centers within programs, classrooms within centers, and for the 60 programs, children within classrooms. A total of 165 Head Start programs participated in the Classroom Study in spring 2020. This included 59 programs that were selected and participated in fall 2019 as part of the Classroom plus Child Outcome Study, plus an additional 106 programs. Programs and centers that were selected for the classroom study will be revisited in the spring of 2020 with a refresh sample. According to the study design, FACES would have assessed children, surveyed parents, and asked teachers to provide information on children in fall 2019 and spring 2020 as part of the Classroom plus Child Outcome study, which is shown here in green. However, because of COVID, FACES 2019 canceled the in-person data collection of child assessments in spring 2020. Therefore, FACES 2019 assessed the school readiness skills of more than 2,000 children who attended 59 Head Start programs in the fall only. In fall and spring, FACES surveyed parents about their family characteristics and home environment and asked teachers to rate the children's social and emotional skills, classroom behavior, and approaches to learning, and to report on any concerns about the children and how those concerns were addressed. The Classroom plus Child Outcome study collected child level data and program and classroom teacher level data from 59 programs. Only program center and classroom teacher level data were collected from the additional 106 programs. Therefore, in spring 2020, the teachers, center directors, and program directors from all 165 programs completed surveys as part of the classroom study. Like the child assessments, the classroom observations were canceled in spring 2020. In spring 2022, the classroom study will be repeated to collect program center and classroom teacher level data from a target sample of 180 programs. Across the next 4 slides, I'll describe the data collected during the program year. In the Classroom plus Child Outcome study, direct child assessment data was collected in the 59 programs in the fall only. This included children's cognitive skills in language, literacy, mathematics, and executive function and physical development. And assessors also rated children's behavior in the test situation. The assessment included 4 potential language paths based on the language the child used most often at home and a language screener. So children could be assessed in English, primarily assessed in English, primarily assessed in Spanish, or assessed in English with a shortened assessment. The specific assessments children received could vary by language path, and more details on this are included in the user's manual. In the Classroom plus Child Outcome study, data was collected in the fall and spring in the 59 programs in which teachers reported on individual children's social emotional skills, and parents completed surveys about family, home life, and community. In the spring of the program year, data were gathered across the 165 programs. So teachers and directors completed surveys about themselves and classroom and program practices. For example, teachers reported on training and their educational background, and directors reported on staffing and recruitment. And finally, in spring of 2020, the COVID-19 response module included specific questions in the program director and center director surveys related to how programs and centers adjusted their services and communications with both families and staff during the pandemic. Program directors reported on topics such as COVID-related program closures, and center directors reported on staff and family experiences. Now let's talk about the FACES 2019 instrument administration characteristics. So again, in the fall only, children participated in a 60-minute one-on-one direct child assessment that was conducted by trained field staff. These assessors used a web-based instrument on a laptop, and questions were displayed on their laptop, and a second monitor displayed images for the child. In the fall and spring, teachers completed a 10-minute teacher-child report, or TCR for short, online or using a paper instrument. and parents could complete their 25-minute survey online or by telephone interview. The 3 instruments listed in the table were administered in spring 2020 only. The 30-minute teacher survey could be done online or by using a paper survey. And directors had the option of responding to a 40-minute survey online or using a paper instrument. Now that you have an overview of the study, let's talk about the data file structure and conventions. So the FACES 2019 data are organized into 3 separate data files. There's the Spring 2020 Center Program file that includes data from the Spring Program and Center Director surveys. There's the Spring 2020 Classroom Teacher file that includes data from the Spring Teacher Survey. And finally, there's the Fall 2019 through Spring 2020 Child Level file. This includes the fall data from the direct assessment and fall and spring data from the TCR and parent survey. Each of the files contains a set of identifiers or ID variables that identify each case on the file. For example, each sampled child, classroom, teacher, center, and program. There is also a set of flags indicating whether there is a completed instrument for the case from each of the data sources. The files contain item-level data from one or more of the study instruments. For example, the Center Program file includes responses to the items on the Program and Center Director surveys. And as the slide notes, there are some exceptions, and for those we provide composite variables. Each file includes composite variables and scores that were developed from responses to questions asked in the surveys. The child level file is unique because it includes assessment scores derived from the direct and indirect assessments and composite variables from all of the other data sources. So that file has composites for the parent, teacher, center director, and program director surveys. Each file also contains the weight variables and the stratification and primary sampling unit variables. And finally, given that the parent surveys, child assessments, and TCRs were only administered in 60 programs, there are indicators in the program center and classroom teacher files that identify which programs have child level data. Certain data that were collected as part of FACES 2019 are not included on the data files. First, copyrighted items in the direct child assessment and TCR are redacted from the data files. And chapters 3 and 4 of the user's manual include descriptions of the measures used in the assessments and their administration. Second, some variables were coarsened to protect confidentiality. For instance, teacher race categories with very low incidence were collapsed into other. And additionally, some item level information like income is included as a composite variable rather than several item level variables. The composite variable pulls information from multiple income variables to report the information as one categorical variable. Chapter 7 of the user's manual includes a full list of composites and scores. Composite variables and scores fall into one of 5 groups, with the first 4 of those groups listed here on the slide, and I'll review the 5th coming up next. So first, there are child and family characteristics that include variables that tap constructs such as race and ethnicity. We also have family processes and parenting variables, for instance, family-child activities. There are teacher or classroom characteristics from the teacher survey, and these variables capture key aspects of teachers such as depressive symptoms. And finally, there are program and center characteristics, for example, teacher turnover. Now, the 5th group that I had mentioned includes scores based on the direct and indirect assessments. Direct assessment scores include children's cognitive skills in 3 areas, So there's language, literacy, and mathematics, as well as executive function and physical health and development. Indirect assessment scores are based on assessor and teacher ratings of children's social emotional behaviors and on teacher ratings of approaches to learning and accomplishments. Direct and indirect assessment scores include raw, standard, percentile, T, Z, and W scores, and IRT-based scale scores, depending on the assessment. Raw W scores and IRT-based scores are indicators of absolute performance. Standard, percentile, T-scores, and Z-scores provide information about performance relative to other children the same age from a reference population. Each score may be used to address different types of questions about children's skills and development, and which scores to use will depend on your research question and the type of analysis that you will be doing. And again, more information is available in the user's manual. So on this screen are the language, which includes receptive and expressive vocabulary, and literacy scores. That includes letter word knowledge, letter sound knowledge, and early writing, available by assessment on the child level file. And as you can see, the types of scores available vary by the assessment. This slide shows the scores available for mathematics, executive function, and physical and health development. And here for the indirect assessment scores, there are a set of criterion or raw scores of children's cognitive skills around emergent literacy and social emotional development that include social skills, problem behaviors, and approaches to learning that were derived from responses on the teacher-child report. Scores capturing children's social skills and problem behaviors are derived from several established rating scales for young children. The assessor reported scores of children's cognitive and social behavior, such as attention or sociability, during the direct assessment included both raw and standard scores derived from the lighter 3 examiner rating scale. So why use composite variables and assessment scores? There are almost an infinite number of variables and scores that could be created using the FACES data. Priority was given to variables that use data from multiple items or sources and that require considerable effort to create. Some variables used a combination of data from survey instruments and from a proprietary survey management system. Special statistical methods and software are needed to develop some of the child assessment scores. For example, item response theory, analyses for assessment scores. And even with this knowledge and software, certain key variables could not be created by users because of restrictions on sharing individual item level data from copyrighted protected measures. For the most part, variables that are simple recodes or transformations of survey item or questions are not included in the composites. Additionally, using these variables on the file allows for comparability with other FACES reporting and other data users. FACES 2019 follows certain conventions when naming and labeling variables and assigning missing variable codes. Most variable names use a standard set of prefixes, in which the first character represents the source instrument, such as the parent survey, and the second character represents the wave in which information was collected. So a 1 equals fall 2019, and a 2 equals spring 2020. You can use this to identify the source and data collection wave for each of the variables. For example, a variable beginning with P1 tells you that it came from the fall 2019 parent survey. For survey items, the rest of the variable name identifies the survey item number in the source instrument. For instance, P1 D01 is based on item D1 in the fall parent survey. For composite variables, it is a shortened description of the construct represented by the variable. For example, P1 HH size is the number of people in the household from the fall 2019 parent survey. There are a few exceptions that do not follow these conventions, and that includes identifiers such as child ID or analysis weights such as PRA1WT. And again, you can find more information on variable conventions in the user's manual or refer to our codebooks and Appendix H that has descriptions of all of the composite variables on the data files. So as far as missing data, there are 3 sources of missing data in FACES 2019. First, there's unit non-response, which occurs when an entire instrument is missing for a case. For example, the parent of a sample child did not complete a parent survey in the fall. And unit non-response is addressed through the application of the analysis weights. Second, item non-response occurs when there are missing data on individual items that should have been responded to within a given instrument. Respondents may refuse to answer, state they don't know the answer, or skip the question. Third, legitimate skips happen when items are only answered based on a prior response or condition. For example, parents may be asked for more detailed information on the language spoken in the home, which is item D10 in the parent survey, if they first indicate a language other than English is spoken in the home, which is item D7. You should determine how to handle data involving legitimate skips because it can affect your findings. Take those parent survey items D10 and D7 that I just talked about, and they're shown on the slide as an example. If you are interested in the percentage of children whose parents usually speak to them in Spanish at home, and you simply calculate the percentage from responses to question D10, you will find that many of children's parents report speaking to them in Spanish. However, to answer this question correctly, you must consider those parents who reported only speaking English in the home, which was item D7, skipped item D10. If we account for that legitimate skip and include those parents in the denominator, a much smaller percentage of children's parents report Spanish as their primary home language. Okay, so now I'm going to hand it over to Lisa, who will talk about weights and variance estimation.
Thank you, Ashley. Now let's touch briefly on some tips for working with the FACES data around weights and variance estimation, given its complex sample design. Thinking about FACES 2019 and analysis weights, there are several features of FACES 2019 and most large-scale national studies that are important to keep in mind when considering to use weighted or unweighted data in your analysis. FACES 2019 is designed to produce national estimates for Head Start programs and centers, classrooms and teachers, and children and their families. However, FACES 2019 is a sample survey. It is not a census of Head Start programs, centers, classrooms, and children. That is, the entire population was not surveyed. Only a small portion of each of these populations was part of the study. Also important is the type of sample. FACES 2019 is not a simple random sample of Head Start programs, classrooms, and children. It uses a complex design that includes multiple levels of sampling and stratification to reduce the cost of the study and to ensure that the samples are representative of the population from which they are drawn. Therefore, not all had an equal probability of selection. Programs and centers were selected using a probability proportional to size, or PPS, based on the number of classrooms. Then classrooms and children were selected with equal probability from those programs and centers. Further, to consider for your analysis, not all programs, staff, parents, and children who were sampled or asked to complete a study instrument did so. There was unit non-response, which varied by instrument. And looking across the program year, children who left their Head Start program after the fall data collection were not eligible for spring follow-up. So the selection and participation at all these levels means needing to account for that in making estimates, which is why data users should use weights. Weights adjust for different features of complex sample designs like the one used in FACES 2019, and for non-response and sample attrition that is inherent in any national longitudinal study. Specifically, weights adjust for differential selection probabilities that the multi-stage sampling meant not all had an equal chance of selection into the sample. Weights also adjust for differences in non-response to participate or for an instrument among certain groups of the population, and for attrition of children from fall to spring. This would be for unit non-response, not item non-response or individual items in an instrument. Different imputation methods are needed to adjust for item level missing data. Weights can help to reduce the potential for bias when there is differential non-response and/or attrition. We examined for potential non-response bias at the program, center, classroom, and child levels, and concluded that the risk for non-response bias is sufficiently mitigated if researchers use the appropriate weight. Chapter 6 of the user's manual includes more detail for those interested. Given these adjustments, weights then can be used when estimating characteristics of the population, which is a primary goal for FACES 2019. When unweighted data are used, each observation is counted equally, and the data represents only the observations of those programs and individuals in the sample. That would focus on the characteristics of the 165 programs and the 2,200 children in the study sample. But FACES aims to describe the characteristics of the population of Head Start children and their families, classrooms, and programs. When weighted data are used, the observations are counted relative to sample members' representation in the population from which the sample was drawn and can produce reliable estimates for this population. Chapter 6 in the user's manual includes the list of weights as well as guidance on selection. First and foremost, the weight you choose should support the analysis that is required to answer your research question. For example, what data will be used and from which sample and instruments? And does the analysis focus on a single time point or changes over 2 time points? Answering these questions will help you decide on which weight is best for your purposes. You will not always find a weight that perfectly fits your needs. In many cases, you will need to decide between 2 or more weights, basing your decision on several factors. As we just mentioned, the FACES 2019 is a sample survey, and the data collected from sample participants are used to estimate population characteristics. And standard error is a measure of that variability of these estimates. It indicates how close an estimate derived from one sample is to the actual value in the population. The smaller the standard error, the more precise the estimate. Standard errors are also used when testing research hypotheses, such as the characteristics of 2 or more groups of children and the association between 2 or more variables. Because standard errors play such an important role in research, it is important that they are accurate and that they capture the key features of the sample design. Many of the standard procedures found in commonly used statistical packages assume that the data are from a simple random sample where the cases are assumed to be independent from one another and every case had an equal probability of being selected. Classrooms and children in the FACES sample are not independent given the clustered nature of designs. For example, classrooms are clustered in programs and children are clustered in classrooms. And not all sampling units had the same probability of selection, as I just noted earlier. So standard procedures are not appropriate for estimating standard errors generated from the complex sample design used in FACES. Software packages designed for simple random samples would tend to underestimate the standard errors for estimates derived from FACES data. And using inaccurate standard errors when testing research hypotheses can lead to identifying statistically significant results when none are present, or vice versa. Using the correct standard error will help to reduce the chances of both types of error. The user's manual can help. Section G on variance estimation in Chapter 6 includes the specifications and codes that you need to use to calculate Taylor series standard errors in programs that can handle complex sample designs such as Sudan and SAS. More information on the variance estimation, as well as the instruments and what was collected and available in the data file, can be found in the user's manual. So let's turn to some resources that are available to provide you with the information you need to analyze the data accurately and to publish from this complex data set. The FACES 2019 User's Manual has been mentioned several times in the last several minutes by Ashley and myself, and it is the primary resource for information about the study design and its execution. The manual includes useful information about the organization and structure of the data file and its use. This slide lists the key sections of the manual. Regardless of your experiences using data from large-scale studies such as FACES 2019, you should begin by reading the Getting Started section of the user's manual. It provides a brief introduction to the study and directs the reader where to go to find more information on some of the major technical issues researchers will confront when working with these data. The user's manual also includes 8 appendices that provide additional information about FACES 2019 and the data on the data files. The first 4 of these, appendices A through D, focus on the study design. In particular, Appendix A contains detail on design and instrumentation differences across FACES studies from FACES 1997 through FACES 2019. Appendix C contains an instrument content matrix for each of the study instruments and is an easy way to identify the types of measures and composites that are included in FACES 2019. While information in the content matrices provides a way to quickly identify what kinds of questions might be answered using the data, researchers should look at the actual items in the study instruments and be familiar with the different copyrighted instruments that are used in FACES 2019 that Ashley outlined earlier. You can find those survey items in Appendix D. It includes a copy of each instrument that was used. Any copyrighted instruments or scales, to include the direct child assessments and indirect assessment of social skills and behaviors, are not included per publisher agreements, but Chapter 3 of the user manual details the original measures that were used. Additional appendices are also valuable resources. The code books in Appendix E on center program files, Appendix F on the classroom and teacher file, and Appendix G on the child level file lists for each variable that is on the file its name and label, the data format and type, and the unweighted descriptive statistics. Researchers can review this codebook to guide analysis and note when values obtained in your analysis do not align with the data. However, the unweighted information is not intended for reporting. Further descriptions of the composite variables are detailed in Appendix H. These composite variables, to include assessment scores, are listed in tables in Chapter 7 of the user's manual. And the manual describes how each was constructed and offers guidance on which assessment score to use for different research questions. In addition to the user's manual, the OPRE study website includes several types of products using data from FACES 2019 and past FACES studies. Examples on the screen here include FACES 2019 products that have recently been released. First, we have study reports that have a set of data tables that provide information from all aspects of the study: parent surveys, child assessment data, surveys of Head Start staff. And it is where you can find the weighted percentages or averages on a broad range of topics to have specific numbers on the experiences and characteristics for Head Start children, families, and programs. These reports include an introduction to the study design and methods as well. We have 3 study reports, one on fall 2019 data and 2 spring 2020 reports covering child level and classroom program level data. Second, we have developed topical briefs that are shorter than the study report, relying more on figures to tell the story of a specific topic with greater context. For example, how social and community support and family economic well-being are associated with child and family well-being. Third, we also have briefs that explore the measurement performance of new scales or assessments for children in Head Start. You can find information on these products with FACES findings by Googling OPRE FACES to find the ACF FACES website. We will also include a QR code later in the webinar. Next, Brenda is going to talk about the Child and Family Data Archive.
Thank you, Elizabeth. As I mentioned before, the Child and Family Data Archive, also known as CFData, is an archive that is funded through an OPRE contract and housed at ICPSR at the University of Michigan. Launched in 2019, CFData preserves and disseminates data on topics related to young children, their families and communities, and the programs that serve them. The FACES 2019 data is just one of the hundreds of data sets archived at CFData with accompanying documentation for secondary data analysis on important issues of policy and practice relevance. These data are available to researchers to analyze free of charge. CFData has a range of data, including data on federal and state funded programs such as Head Start, the Child Care and Development Fund Block Grant, and the Maternal, Infant, and Early Childhood Home Visiting Program. We also have administrative data, community-based surveys focused on parent and child development, and observational studies in classrooms and homes. The CFData website is available at childandfamilydataarchive.org. Through the website, researchers, policymakers, and other users can explore data, learn more about childcare and early education research, and discover the training opportunities presented by CFData. Under the Data tab on the website, users can search and browse the over 350 data studies cataloged at CFData. Users can also browse CFData's most recent releases there. Other data-related tabs include the Variables and Publications tabs, where you can search for variables and data-related publications of interest and then link back to the study's data set. Under the About Us tab, users can learn more about CFData, about our project team, and announcements, data releases, and upcoming trainings through the news link. We also have a collection of video resources on our website, which you can find under the Support for Researchers tab. Here you will find many videos of data release webinars and their accompanying slides, as well as data trainings offered by data producers. You can even filter the videos by a particular data set. A video recording of this webinar will be added to this page when available. So that was just a brief overview of CFData, but to learn more about the archive, we encourage you to visit us at our website and click on the About Us page. There you'll find a fun, short 2-minute video that introduces you to the collection and the resources we provide to users like you. So now let's turn to how you can access the FACES 2019 data. To find the study, enter the study title or acronym in the search box, highlighted here by the big red oval, and hit return or click on the magnifying glass. On the search results page, click on the FACES 2019 study title, here shown at the top of the search results list, and that will take you to the study homepage. Here is a screenshot of the FACES 2019 study homepage. The homepage is where you will find important information such as a summary about the study and information on the study's methodology, sampling, weights, and more. The study homepage is also where users can search and compare variables and view publications based on use of the FACES 2019 data. So while users may preview and download the public documentation located on the Data and Documentation tab, circled here in red, a restricted data application is required for users to gain access to the restricted data. However, you can still explore the data at the variable level without downloading the data. Using the Variables Search tab on the study homepage, users can search for and compare variables within the FACES 2019 data. Simply enter words or phrases that relate to your measures of interest in the search box, highlighted with the red oval. The search results will return a list of variables related to your search term, including information on the variable name, label, question text, variable type, and associated data set by data set number. The variable level search feature is another great way to identify variables of interest in addition to exploring the study codebook, user guide, and other documentation. So once you've decided that you'd like to use these data, you can begin your application by clicking on the Access Restricted Data button, highlighted here, and then follow the instructions and complete the sections that are shown next. The application requires several pieces of information, including a description of the intended research project, a data security plan, an IRB letter, and a signed restricted data use agreement. Archive staff are available to assist you with your application and to answer any questions. Just email us at cfdata-help@umich.edu with the application request number. Next, I will turn it back to Ashley.
Thanks, Brenda. So our current study plans. The original FACES 2019 study design called for the classroom study to be repeated in spring 2022 to collect program center level and classroom teacher level data from a target sample of 180 programs, as I mentioned before. The program sample has been refreshed for the classroom study in spring 2022 to account for new Head Start programs that began operation since the initial program sample selection back in 2019. Any originally sampled Head Start programs that became ineligible, for example, those that lost funding or otherwise no longer provide services between 2019 and 2022, will no longer be part of the study. And no child level data will be collected in spring 2022 in the classroom study. However, because of the continued impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, FACES 2019 actually added data collections for the 2021 to 2022 program year that's focused on children and families in a subset of programs who participated in the Classroom Plus Child Outcome study. Parents and teachers are being asked to report about themselves and study children, and instruments focus on capturing how families are doing nearly 2 years into the COVID-19 pandemic. Okay, and I'll turn it back to you, Brenda.
Okay, so if you would like to learn more about the data and apply for access, please visit the FACES study homepage on the CFData website, or you can use this QR code seen here. If you'd like to learn more about the study itself and access study reports, please visit the FACES study page on the ACF website. For questions about the FACES 2019 data, you can email faces-aianfaces-help@mathematica-mpr.com. And now we are happy to take a few questions. So feel free to type them into the question box, or you can raise your hand and we will unmute your mic. So I see several questions have come in already. So the first question we have is, do you have variables for region, Northwest, Midwest, South, Northeast, et cetera, and or metropolitan statistical area, urban, rural?
Thanks. That's a good question. We do not have the location variables on the data files due to disclosure risk and protecting the confidentiality of our programs and centers and all the participants. So FACES does not support those types of estimates. And I see down below, actually, we have another question. If FACES includes state or region level weights. And the answer to that one is no as well. So that the FACES data does not support state or region estimates.
Okay. What's the best way to determine the overlap between FACES 2019 measures / constructs and those from earlier waves, e.g. FACES 2014?
I can take this one. As noted, I think the question came in before the slide, but the Appendix A gives the history of the measures and the instruments from 97 through 2019. And Appendix C can give you a little more at the topic level where we have content matrices that highlights topics that were collected in 2019, but also does have a column relative to 2014. Then you also do have, at least from FACES 2006 through FACES 2014, Mathematica has always included an appendix that has the instruments if you need to go to the item level detail. But Appendix A gives you that broad scope all the way back to 1997. Appendix C can have a comparison of 2019 versus 2014 at the content matrix level.
What is the process for gaining access to the data? i.e., is it public or restricted, and what does the process entail if restricted? The data are restricted, so you will have to apply to gain access. You can go to our website, the Child and Family Data Archive.org, and go to the FACES 2019 study homepage. At that point, you can find the access restricted data button, which will take you to our application system. And from there, you'll see that you have to enter in a research description, a data security plan, and an IRB determination letter, and a restricted data use agreement. And so once you submit all of that, we will review the materials and work with you on getting you access. What are the implications of the cancellation of spring 2020 in-person data collection for analyses? Can I still understand children's progress over the course of the Head Start year?
I can take this one. There, of course, as we noted, were not direct child assessments done in the spring, but there is the teacher-child report, which does provide information on children's accomplishments, as well as in areas around socio-emotional skills and classroom behaviors. We, on that other resources slide, if you go to ACF website, we actually also have a brief that just came out that looks at the TCR and its ability to have skills that can map to things and whether they are appropriate to serve as proxies in times when direct child assessments were not possible and using teacher ratings. In terms of classroom observations, we don't have a direct proxy of that observed classroom quality, but the teacher survey does include items related to the classroom experiences and activities and other things about the classroom and the teacher that can help to still address questions to the best of the ability for spring 2020.
Okay. Will the presentation slides be made available with the recording? Yes, we will have the slides available on our video resources page once the recording is up. Can you compare FACES 2019 data to past FACES studies?
I can take this one. So The answer is yes. You know, FACES is designed with successive nationally representative samples. So, you know, you'd have different descriptive data from different years of the study. So for example, you could combine child outcome and parent survey data from FACES 2014 and FACES 2019. You know, to the extent possible across the different FACES studies, we've tried to use comparable instruments and overlap the types of variables we're using. But of course, you know, FACES has undergone updates to ensure it reflects current Head Start policies and practices. So as we described before, I would just caution to, you know, review the user's manual and the appendices to really consider what changes have happened in those earlier studies as you are comparing your data.
Okay, I think we only have time to take one more question live right now, but please feel free to email us your question, and we'll provide the contact information in an email, and we can get back to you on any questions that come up. So the last question is the original spring 2022 planned data collection happening?
Sure. So it is currently happening. It's a bit different than originally planned. We are not conducting the in-person classroom observation, for example, but we are fielding the planned staff surveys. And like I noted before, we added a parent survey and teacher-child report in a subset of programs.
Okay, great. So now I'd just like to quickly remind you all to visit the CFData website to request access to these data. And then you can also sign up for our listserv to receive notifications on data release announcements, data webinars and workshops, as well as our quarterly newsletter. Lastly, please contact us at cfdata-help@umich.edu for questions or assistance. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And thank you to Ashley and Elizabeth for sharing all of this great information.